How's it going, guys? 210 East here, back with episode 3 of Modern Love. Honestly, I feel like I pretty much reached the point where if I wasn't doing a review for this show, I probably wouldn't continue watching it on my own. The writing so far has just been bleh. And as I've said in my reviews of the first 2 episodes, that is to some extent unavoidable due to the source material, but I'll be getting a little more in-depth with that this time around. That being said, you know what? I'm still having fun doing this series. I'm not getting any views on it, but for like the 2 people that are actually watching this right now, I salute you, and I hope that you are enjoying it, because honestly, I don't even know why I'm still doing these anymore. So, this episode, we've got Anne Hathaway as the main character, which I was happy to see because I am most certainly a fan. So let's just establish right off the bat, this is a story about somebody who deals with bipolar disorder. Just wanted you guys to have that context even before the recap. So the episode starts with Anne Hathaway, or Lexie, sitting and writing a bio for a dating website. And there's a voiceover as she ponders who she is and how she wants to make this dating profile. In trying to describe herself, she begins to tell a story, and so we get a flashback and stay in this flashback for the majority of the rest of the episode. So the story starts off with her going to the supermarket. She feels amazing and happy and everything's great. It's literally like a musical. People are dancing in the background. It's super cringe, but knowing that this is meant to represent the internal nature, the up that she feels as part of being bipolar, it's appropriate because it's supposed to be over the top. So she sees and approaches this guy. They talk about peaches. She's like, I like mine firm and juicy. And he's like, yeah, but no bruises. We'll get to this peaches talk later on. So they flirt and decide to go on a date. Everything's all good, there's a spark, everything's amazing, and at this point, we're all just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And of course, it does. The first sign of this is when she then goes to work and is confronted by her boss, I think it is, someone who works with her, about Lexie missing a bunch of days. Lexie has excuses for it, and it seems like, okay, maybe it's not a big deal, but there's a suggestion that, something's up with her and not being able to come into work sometimes. When she gets home, she completely crashes and spirals into a down episode, and we see and begin to understand her condition a little bit. So then she has the date with the guy she met, but she is in a down state and is completely different. She's not the energetic and cheerful, exuberant person that he met in the supermarket, and he's kind of turned off. It doesn't really go well, but just like with her job, she doesn't tell him about her being bipolar. She just makes excuses for why she's so down. So then we get to another deeper flashback into her past where she explains her childhood and her story with being bipolar and how it started and how she dealt with it. She decided at an early age that if she can just make up for the times where she is depressed and unable to function or show up for anything by being so incredibly amazing the other half of the time, she can still live her life. But of course, holding in this secret is what has given her so much trouble, perhaps just as much as the condition itself. So then some time passes and she's feeling up again and she's all happy again and everything's great, and she calls the guy she met at the supermarket again and makes plans. She insists on getting together that day, that morning, but he's like, this is so sudden, and then they agree on that night. She spends all day getting ready and cleaning up the house, once again trying to hide any evidence of being bipolar. And then she's all set to go, but moments before he shows up, she looks in the mirror and realizes she's headed towards a big downswing. And she sort of just crumbles and never answers the guy who's trying to buzz in downstairs, and he walks away. And she's really sad, and there's more voiceover about how she needs to stop hiding herself from everyone. Then she quits her job, but she goes out with her coworker friend, and finally with her in that moment, she is able to come out and tell her friend that she is bipolar, and it's a huge weight off her chest. She feels free, and she runs wild with it and starts calling all these people from her past and telling them and getting support, and they're all understanding. And then the episode ends with this positive note. She isn't cured of being bipolar, but she has learned to live with it out in the open, and she's also on medication, so yay, happy-ish ending. Alright, there's the recap. Now on to thoughts and analysis. So this episode is more similar to the first episode than the second, where the love depicted is more of an internal one. I mean, it's kind of the case in the first episode with Maggie, but kind of not. Anyway, so in this case, Lexie, Anne Hathaway's character, is learning to love herself and to accept herself for who she is. someone with bipolar disorder. And the story is more about her learning to put her entire self out in the world and let everybody else in her life get to know the real and full version of herself. Because of this, the guy or romantic interest isn't really important or part of the endgame. Instead, he's just there to serve as a part of her process. There's some cool symbolism used with the peach, which are often used to represent, among other things, femininity. If you've seen my review of the Korean miniseries Persona, there is a similar use of peaches present in episode 1 of that series. In this case, the peach is used as kind of a symbol for Lexie herself, and the condition of the peach is linked to her mental condition in a way. When the guy from the supermarket says he doesn't like his peaches with bruises, it's kind of a reference to him or society in general not wanting to deal with anyone who has mental conditions or disorders, anything out of the ordinary. Then later on, he gets her this peach that is made out of wood. In other words, a peach that can't go bad. It's not ripe and alive, but not rotten either. And this is maybe a reference to the even-keeled middle ground she finds at the end of the episode when she's on medication. Not as many highs or lows, but more of a tame middle space. And so this is why it is appropriate to give that shot of the artificial tame peach as the last shot of the episode. The notion that people with disorders are people no one wants to deal with or be aware of isn't directly placed on the guy she meets at the supermarket, as he seems to be a decent guy, but the attitude is more a reflection of Lexie's own fear of what she thinks people will be like if they knew about her condition. And it's this fear or inability to be her true self with people that becomes the obstacle to overcome in this story. One thing I really disliked about this episode is the over-explanation, the excessive exposition that is used. It all begins with the voiceover, which in general I find very hit or miss. Don't get me wrong, voiceovers can be useful and done well, but more often than not, they are used as a sort of cheap way of getting across points that filmmaking is supposed to do visually. And I get it, some of the dialogue for the voiceover was lifted right from the essay itself that this episode was based on. I barely feel like I have anything to say here in the way of analysis because everything the episode seeks to convey to the audience is so aggressively in your face as you watch it. Connections and symbolism that most anyone could pick up on by themselves never gets a chance to sink in or be discovered organically because a minute later Lexie is explaining it in her voiceover. The most frustrating part is that the filmmaking and visual storytelling is there, and the themes and commentary come through well enough. But that's why the voiceover is just so overkill on top of it. It'd be one thing if the visual storytelling was awful and non-existent, and the voiceover was just like duct tape making it all come together. But the way it's done, it's more like doing a puzzle, fitting the pieces all together to create the picture, and then just putting duct tape on top of that. It's unnecessary, and it ruins the experience the audience might have of coming to these conclusions and interpretations on their own. So let me just go over some examples of what I'm talking about. The peach symbolism, for one. The references to Rita Hayworth and that Lexie watches old movies and is connected to this actress because of her similar ideology of only showing the Hollywood-style version of herself, which of course isn't genuine. Think about the show's title, Modern Love. In modern times, we have begun to be okay with these kind of conditions being more in the open, in the public sphere. They aren't kept hidden away as they were in the old days like the 60s and 50s. Therapy is one example of something related to mental health that was seen as taboo to talk about or to acknowledge in everyday conversation. But now it's so out in the open, and many people are even proud of talking about their therapists and their therapy and how much it's helped them. So this is why there is a connection between Lexie and the old movies and old movie actresses, who are all part of a Hollywood and a culture where things like being bipolar should be hidden and not out in the open. But of course, this commentary is given no room to breathe because Anne Hathaway just literally spells it all out right after the nicely done scene of her watching the old movie before her date. Alright, so a couple of final points. First, after another episode with blech writing, I finally went and found the essay this episode was based on, which I will link in the description. Let me just say this wasn't a case of John Carney, the screenwriter for the show, butchering a masterpiece of modern literature. On the other hand, it also wasn't a case of a master director doing what he could with shitty source material. The mediocrity flows both ways. So before I finish, let's check in with our New York City motif. it's still kind of there in a way. It is definitely the least present in this episode compared to the other two, but New York City is still directly referenced. In the sequence where Lexie is on her second big upswing, there is a sort of internal fantasy of a theme of a TV show that she stars in playing in the background, complete with an intro song. Also present is a reference to New York City being Lexie's own town, and that it's calling her name. So I think the connection to New York here is the ups and downs, the experience of living in New York City and trying to make it in New York, a tried and true trope in itself. One minute it's this magical place of endless possibilities and adventure, the next it's got you flat on your ass and keeping you down. Now, to be clear, I am not trying to say that living in New York City and that experience is the same as being bipolar. I'm just trying to connect New York City and the actual plot and character involved in this episode. Okay, so final thoughts. This episode was yet another experience for me. Another example of a very good actor not being used to their potential, although of course, once again, just like Dev Patel, Anne Hathaway does a great job with what she's given. The scene in the bathroom where she breaks down felt totally real, and although I cannot with any authority say whether her portrayal of being bipolar was accurate, it was at least believable to me. This also has been 3 episodes straight of John Carney's writing and directing. And yeah, not a huge fan so far. So I am very much looking forward to episode 4, which is written and directed by someone else, and interested to see how different it will be. Hopefully I'll get a breath of fresh air. Anyways, that's it for episode 3. If you're enjoying this series, which is like maybe one person that's watching this at this point, go ahead and drop a like and or a comment telling me what you think about this show or this episode in particular, and also subscribe if you're new. Once again, this is 210 East. I'll see you at episode 4.